If you're still not where you want to be, it's not about money, connections, or luck. It's about how you think. Because your reality mirrors your beliefs. And if your beliefs are small, your life will stay small. But you can break that right now. There's a reason you're still not where you want to be, and it's not because you're not smart enough. It's not because you lack a head start. And it's definitely not because others have more opportunities than you. The truth is simpler and harder to face. Your thinking is trapped inside a framework that simply can't produce wealth. And I don't just mean financial wealth, I mean mental wealth, behavioral, energetic. Everything you have right now is a result of your beliefs. And everything you don't have is too. Your mind is a bank. And every single day you're either depositing new ideas or withdrawing old fears. Both are building your capital. But here's the difference. Poor thinking seeks safety. Wealthy thinking seeks influence. Poor thinking waits for guarantees. Wealthy thinking creates opportunities. Poor thinking clings to what's familiar. Wealthy thinking leans into challenge. The wealthiest people didn't get rich because of their ideas. Ideas are everywhere. They got rich because of the kind of thinking that gave birth to those ideas that carried them through failure and turned them into systems. The difference isn't that they were better, it's that they thought like people who already had what they were chasing. And so they moved. How do you think about money? About work? About mistakes? About risk? These 4 questions are your real bank accounts. Because if your thoughts about money are rooted in lack, if work feels like a burden, if mistakes are shameful, and risk feels like a threat, then your entire life is built around self-preservation. And wealth is always the result of creation. Giving, investing, acting without guarantees, that's not just strategy. That's a way of thinking. And here's the truth. You cannot have more than your mind is willing to allow. Not because the universe is against you, but because you haven't yet accepted more as possible. And until you break the old belief system, no new strategy will ever take off. Because strategy is just a tool. And your mindset, that's the hand that holds it. You don't realize how deeply your thoughts program your actions. You can say, I want to be free, rich, influential, but still think like an employee, like a consumer, like someone waiting for permission. That's a conflict of systems. It's like trying to launch a rocket from a floppy disk. It won't fly. And the problem's not the rocket. The problem is your mindset. It can't handle the pressure of a higher level. The mind of poverty always thinks in terms of, what am I allowed to do? What am I worthy of? What feels safe? But the mind of abundance, it lives in a different dimension. What can I create? Who can I help? What price am I willing to pay for a breakthrough? And that difference is not poetic. It's practical. Because when you fear spending, you don't invest. When you fear loss, you never win. And when you fear beginning, all you ever build are walls around your dream. The problem isn't that you don't get opportunities. The problem is your mind either can't see them, or worse, sees them and still won't let you act. Because deep inside you lives an identity. And that identity says, I'm not one of those people. And until you break that, you'll always live your life as not one of them. The wealthiest people think in terms of systems, not just outcomes. They don't ask how much can I make. They ask how do I scale this? How do I automate it? How do I escape manual mode? Their thoughts live in the future, but their actions always in the present. And they think like owners, even when they don't own a thing yet. And here's the key. The mindset of an owner isn't a bank balance. It's a state of consciousness. And every single time you act like the one who owns your time, your choice, your direction, you level up. You rise to a place where there's no room for excuses, no need for permission. Only one question remains. Are you ready to create instead of waiting? Take a hard look. The biggest fortunes didn't come to the people with the best ideas. They came to those who kept their mindset in shape, in focus, under tension. Because your thinking is like a muscle. It weakens when unused. It shrinks when fed passive content. It withers every time you swallow I can't, not for me, or now's not the time. The wealthiest don't allow themselves the luxury of thinking like everyone else. They reject common truths when they don't produce results. They don't hand their decision-making over to emotions. And most of all, they refuse to become slaves to someone else's mental blueprint. Because if you don't train your mind, someone else will. TV, your surroundings. And soon, your thoughts aren't even yours. They're just a copy of someone else's script. But here's the truth. You can start from any state. Even right now, all it takes is a decision. To stop thinking like the masses. To stop believing in outdated patterns. To stop accepting that's just how it is. Thinking is not genetic. It's not passed down in your DNA. It's built through choice. And if today you choose to think differently, you've already changed who you were yesterday. Why is poor thinking dangerous? Because it rejects responsibility. It deflects. It blames. But wealthy thinking always asks, what can I do right now? It's not about resources. It's about focus. And until you shift that focus, no strategy will ever work. Because even the best plan in the hands of a poor thinker becomes just another way to avoid action. On the other hand, even a simple plan in the hands of a creator and owner becomes a breakthrough. You can change everything, but not with new tools, with a new head. And that head is already inside you. It just needs to be activated. Every new action is a signal. I don't think small anymore. If you want to find the root cause of your financial struggles, don't look at the numbers. Look at the mindset that created them. Because every downfall starts not with an event, but with a belief. I'm not capable. It won't work for me. I wasn't born for this. Those aren't facts. They're programs. And the worst part is, they're invisible. They sound normal. They sound like truth, but they're a virus. And that virus spreads not through blood, but through the environment you live in. Think back. What did you hear as a child about money, about rich people, about work, about risk, about those who made all of that? Is the foundation of your current mindset. Even if you're grown now, even if you know better, because knowing isn't living. And if there's still fear, shame, or judgment toward money living in you, your subconscious will block every opportunity, as if it's danger, as if it's pain. Wealthy people aren't just the ones who earn a lot. They're the ones who gave themselves permission to outgrow beliefs, what hold most people back. They don't believe money changes people, because they know it only reveals the real you. They're not afraid to lose everything, because they know it's not about the account, it's about the mentality. And most importantly, they're not ashamed of wanting more, because that's not greed, that's a hunger for growth. And this is the moment of separation. You either live with the belief that your dreams are too much, when spend your life trapped inside limits, or you admit this. Your thinking is your greatest asset, and every day becomes an investment, in thought, in action, in the power that eventually becomes capital, financial, emotional, creatives, systematic. Your task is not to find the money, it's to find the version of you who can create it. And that starts not in your wallet, but in your head. Your thinking is your root system. Wealth is just the fruit. And if you keep watering the soil with fear, doubt, and laziness, nothing valuable will grow. You can move countries. You can change jobs. You can change the people around you. But if you don't change the way you think, the result will always be the same. Because you're carrying the same head into a new plate. And the old head, it'll recreate the old reality. That's hard to accept, because it's easier to believe the problem is random, or unfair, or external. But that is poor thinking, shifting responsibility. The wealthiest, they think in the opposite direction. They look for leverage, not excuses. They ask, what am I still not seeing? What do I not yet know? Where's my weak link? And that's why they grow. Not because it's easy, but because they think differently. Look at your day. What's repeating? Are there moments where you consistently give up your power? That's not random. That's think. And if you want to change the result, change the question. Don't ask what's wrong with me. Ask what kind of thinking is behind this choice. Remember, poverty isn't the absence of money. It's the absence of the power to shift your own thinking. And that power, it's not aggression. It's presence. It's ownership. And the one who thinks like an owner, even with nothing, eventually gains everything. Because wealth always flows toward the one who knows how to manage it. And you can only manage what you understand. And the first thing you must understand is, in the moment you accept this, not as a slogan but as a direction, you'll never think the way you used to. Which means, you'll never live the way you used to. And that is your first and most valuable cap. There are two types of people in this world. Some believe the world owes them something. Others believe they are responsible for everything that happens in their life. The first group lives inside a system of blame. The second inside a system of possibilities. And that mindset, that's what separates those who just survive from those who create. Because blame paralyzes. It makes you search for someone to fault. And once you start looking for who's to blame, growth is over. When someone else is at fault, you've got no power left. The chain is broken. Control is lost. The wealthiest people don't waste energy being outraged. They don't live inside the mindset of I was underestimated, they held me back, or I wasn't lucky. Their thinking is always this: this is mine, I own it, and I'll figure it out. That way of thinking, it's not a gift, not a talent, not genetics. It's a choice, a conscious one, a painful one, but a powerful one. You can choose that mindset at any moment, but you've got to understand something. It has no room for excuses. Nobody's asking why you didn't. They're asking, what did you do when you couldn't? How did you respond when you lost? Did you keep going when everything felt pointless? This is a different logic. It's not about the right decision. It's about the decision to move. The mindset of responsibility always leads you to resources. You stop asking who can give and start asking where can I create. That's why the wealthy didn't always start with advantages. They built them. They didn't wait for doors. They built walls, then cut a hole through them. That's a different way of thinking. It doesn't ask, is this allowed? It asks, how do I make it happen? And here's the truth. Your reality isn't a reflection of your circumstances. It's a reflection of your reactions. And reactions, they're born from thought. So if you want to change your life, you've got to change the way you think. Not emotionally, fundamentally. When I can't becomes what haven't I tried yet? You've already stepped into a new level. And that level, that's where the mind becomes capital. There's one belief that separates the rich from the rest. I'm not a resource. I'm the source. This isn't about ego. It's about ownership. Because when you think like a resource, you wait to be used, chosen, recognized, or paid. But when you think like the source, you create. And that is the core of a mindset that builds wealth. People who think like a source don't wait for inspiration. They create context. They don't look for a job. They look for a problem worth solving. They don't ask, what can I get? They ask, what can I give? And that shift, that's the entire paradigm turning on its head. Because a source mindset doesn't depend on anything external. It's autonomous. And that makes it unbreakable. But this kind of mindset doesn't just appear. You have to train it. Through practice. Through action in spite of fear. Through the habit of seeing problems as challenges, not tragedies. And with each of those reactions, your mind rewires itself. It stops asking why it won't work, and starts asking how to make it work. That's not just new thinking. That's a new you. Those who build capital think through the lens of creation. They don't think short-term. They think in systems. They ask, will this action give results in a year, in 5? Does it solve the root, not just the symptom? That depth, that's what separates creators from users. Because users think in terms of profit. Creators think in terms of impact. And that's why the builders of wealth live in uncertainty. They're not afraid of instability. Stability is only for those who think in straight lines. But growth is chaos. And a mind that knows how to think inside chaos, that mind is already the most valuable asset. Because it sees the unknown not as danger, but as a playing field. And therefore, as freedom. One of the biggest traps of poor thinking is short-term vision. Thinking only in weeks, paychecks, next bills. Anything further feels too far. But that short-sightedness is what keeps people stuck in a loop. Because if your thinking is built for survival, you'll never build a system. And capital isn't an event, it's a system. It doesn't just appear, it grows. And it only grows where long-range thinking lives. The wealthy think in years. They don't ask, is this profitable right now? They ask, will this move get me to where I need to be 5 years from now? That kind of thinking gives them power. Power to endure, to invent, to repeat, to not get thrown off course by short-term chaos because they're locked into long-term vision. That's what makes them rich and free. You can't build an empire counting each day as a loss because there's no instant reward. And as long as you think today didn't work so it's all pointless, you'll keep slamming the door on everything great. Because great things don't show up instantly. They come to those who can hold the rhythm. That's why the wealthy pour time and effort into things that don't pay off right away. They read. They write. They build. They'll spend months solving one core issue because they know long-term thinking isn't philosophy. It's survival strategy at the highest level. But short-term thinking, that's always reaction. It's dependence. It's anxiety. It's when you can't sleep because you don't know what tomorrow holds. Long-term thinking is calm. It's depth. It's power. Because when you can see far ahead, you're in control. But if all you see is today, you're a hostage to those who see farther. Another invisible root of poor thinking? Emotional economics. You make financial decisions based on feelings, not reasoning. Fear stops you from investing. Anger makes you pull out of deals. Euphoria drives you into reckless risks. And that's why you lose. Not from lack of knowledge, but because your thoughts are driven by reaction, not intention. Capital thinking is focused thinking, cold, but not heartless. Sharp. It knows every emotion is temporary, but a system that's permanent. That's why the rich create decision-making systems. Not how do I feel right now, but what aligns with my values, my goals, my rhythm. That doesn't make them robots. It makes them precise. And precision, that's what separates players from spectators. Those who think like capital know how to step outside themselves, to zoom out, to ask, does this move strengthen my long-term strategy? And if it doesn't, they don't chase impulses. They don't snap. They don't rush. They don't retaliate. They open the map, and they move. Because wealth thinking isn't about winning, it's about holding your course. And the course doesn't change because of a temporary storm. That's why reactive thinkers always lose in long cycles. Because when you're tossed by every wave, you're not building, you're just floating. But the rich, they build even when the sea is rough. Because their anchor isn't outside, it's internal. It's thinking that doesn't swing with every emotion. It holds the line. It remembers decisions made in emotion usually cost the most. Your advantage begins where emotional dependence ends. And mental presence begins. Because only then can you hold focus when everything around you breaks. And that's how capital is born. Not from luck, from a mindset that holds under pressure. Each of us has two minds. One inherited, one created. The inherited mind thinks like your family, your culture, your past. It's familiar, safe, slow. It whispers, don't stand out, don't take risks. A job means safety. Money means danger. That mind preserves the status quo. But the created mind, it challenges. It learns new ways of thinking. It doesn't live in someone else's story. It chooses. The greatest victory of wealth thinkers is victory over inherited patterns, over phrases passed down silently, over decades. We're not meant to have much. That's for other people. These phrases often aren't said out loud. They're in the looks, the reactions, the silent expectations of failure. And you either repeat them or rewrite them. Rewriting means doubting the familiar, not automatically accepting what sounds true. Asking, is this belief really mine or was it given to me? And if it's not yours, let it go. You're not obligated to carry the fears of generations. You're not required to preserve lack when abundance lives inside you, and you never need to apologize for wanting more. Capital thinking is always a choice, and that choice always pushes against inertia. You don't wait for the right moment. You don't hope for a break. You don't ask, what if it works? You build a system where it's impossible not to work if you keep the direction, if you don't betray the mindset, if you never return to the old role. And that's why the real breakthrough isn't in the action. It's in the thinking behind it. Because actions can change, but mindset changes everything. And if you change yours, you'll never again be the one who simply reacts to others. You'll become the author. And that is the highest form of capital there is. One you can't trade. One that writes the mark. There's a habit that blocks your growth faster than any mistake. It's the habit of thinking like an employee, even when you want the results of a creator. It's when life becomes just a checklist of tasks, not a game of possibilities. When every day feels like just work to survive. And as long as your mind thinks like a worker, no matter your job title, you'll never rise to the level of an owner. Because ownership isn't a job, it's a mindset. The worker's mindset asks, what do I need to do so I don't get fired? The creator's mindset asks, what system can I build to solve this for hundreds? This isn't about the size of your business. It's about the size of your question. Your life is a mirror of the questions you ask every day. And if your questions are based on survival, your results will be too. Not growth, not breakthrough, just survival. That's why so many people stay stuck, even when they have talent, because they're still thinking inside someone else's system, waiting for permission, waiting for direction, waiting for validation. Even when they start freelancing or launch a business, they think like subordinates. They work like someone still needs to grade their work. But capital thinking doesn't wait for approval. It builds, it judges, it evolves. So if you want to break out, first break your thoughts free from dependency. Don't start by asking, where do I find clients? Start by asking, what value do I bring? Why does my experience matter? How can I increase my impact? That's your reboot. And when you start thinking at the level of impact, money becomes the byproduct. Because impact is capital, just in a different form. And it always turns into financial capital if you nurture it. Here's the truth. You can keep doing exactly what you did yesterday, but if you think differently, you'll get different results. It's not the task that changes the person, it's the mindset that transforms the task. There's another barrier keeping millions stuck in limitation, the consumer mindset. The pattern of always taking, buying, expecting service, comparing prices, looking for discounts. When your mind works like that, you just choose from what someone else already built. But real capital, it never gets born in that mindset. Wealthy minds don't think like consumers. They think like architects. They ask, what new value can I bring into the game? Even when they're buying, they're not focused on savings. They're analyzing structure. Why does this work? What's the value chain here? How could I improve this? They study the model, and when they find a flaw, they don't complain. They build better. That's how breakthroughs are born. If you want to break free, start seeing things not as a customer, but as a strategist. Not just, that's expensive or that's low quality. Ask what's broken here? How can this evolve? That's a whole different mindset. It's engaged. It's active. And that kind of thinking draws capital. Because capital flows where things can be improved, not just consumed. Here's another shift. The consumer looks at price. The owner looks at value. That's not wordplay. That's the foundation of decision-making. Consumer thinking hunts for a deal. Creator thinking searches for leverage. And as long as you're counting every dollar spent, instead of every idea you could monetize, you'll never change the trajectory. Stop thinking your job is to choose the best option. Start thinking your job is to create what's most needed. And from this moment forward, in every situation, ask yourself, not, is this good for me, but could I build this better? That's not just a new perspective, that's a new life. Because the one who thinks like a creator always has something to give, and therefore always has something to receive. There's one more dividing line between poor thinking and capital thinking, and that's your relationship with failure. In most minds, failure means the end, shame, proof you weren't enough. It's something to avoid, run. People fear it so much, they don't dare play any game they could lose. But that fear, that's what kills creation, because there's no progress without risk, and no risk means no growth. But the creator's mind speaks a different language. Their failure isn't the enemy. It's feedback. It's part of the system. It doesn't define your worth. It refines your direction. And the faster you accept failure as part of the game, the faster your field of influence expands. Because now you're no longer afraid to move. And that right there, that's real freedom. Wealthy people don't fear loss. They fear standing still. They know they'll fall. But what matters is how fast they get back up. In the game of capital, the winner isn't the one who never made mistakes. It's the one who wasted the least time on regret. And every time they rise again, they gain not just experience. They gain power, mental toughness, laser focus. They don't break, they build. While others are still analyzing what went wrong, the creator's mind is already on the next launch. That's why results show up for them, not as a reward for talent, but as the natural return on resilience. They see every failure not as a verdict, but as an expense, a normal part of the growth budget. And if you're not thinking that way yet, that's your limit. Risk, it's not the enemy. It's the price of freedom. And the one who fears the price stays in the rental zone, living temporary lives inside someone else's decisions. But the one who pays consciously learns to own outcomes, own themselves. That kind of mindset becomes the most reliable currency there is. the currency of confidence, and no crisis can take that away. One of the deepest differences between wealth thinking and scarcity thinking is understanding the value of time. Poor thinking treats time like it's infinite. It lives in later, not now, I'm not ready yet. But every later is a loss, because time is the only resource that doesn't come back. You can't borrow it, can't buy it. You can only use it or waste it. And that's the real economy of mindset. The capital mindset thinks in priorities. It doesn't do everything. It does what matters. It knows not all tasks are equal. Some bring profit. Others just bring fatigue. That's why builders of capital are obsessed with filters. They refuse to be busy without a result, because busyness isn't success. Often it's just escape. It looks like action, but it's really avoidance. And that's a hallmark of poverty thinking. The wealthiest people are masters of delegation, automation, and concentration. They cut the noise. They don't waste hours arguing, procrastinating, or doubting themselves. Not because they're emotionless, but because they know the cost of every hour. Every hour is either a step toward the goal or a murder of your potential. There is no third option. And here's the bottom line. If you live like everyone else, you'll never have more than they do. Because most people trade their days for tasks that don't build results. And that's they don't ask, what's my highest priority today? They just react. And that reactive mode, it's a sign of broken code. Because action without focus is just activity. And activity doesn't always equal progress. When you accept that your time is capital, something you either invest in yourself or lose to oblivion, you'll stop living in whatever happens and start thinking in how do I do it right. That's the mindset of a creator, and that's the mindset of someone who owns their destiny. The final dividing line between those stuck in survival and those building capital is the ability to think through principles. Not emotion, not inspiration, not pressure, but through a built-in system that drives your choices. Poor thinking lives randomly. Today one way, tomorrow another. It reacts to moods, opinions, weather, fear. It's so flexible, it bends itself out of shape. But that's not strength. That's the absence of spine. Capital thinking always rests on principle. A principle is like a frame. It keeps you from spilling everywhere. It protects your focus, even when the world's collapsing. That's your anchor in a chaotic world. Because everything else can change, markets, rules, trends. But if you've got principle, you won't lose yourself. You adapt without betraying who you are. The most successful people don't have fewer doubts. They just have more discipline. And discipline isn't punishment. It's self-respect for your future self. It's knowing that everything you do today either strengthens your position or weakens it. Every habit you choose either confirms your strength or steals from it, millimeter by millimeter. When you think through principle, you stop waiting. You stop wavering. You know what to do because you've already decided who you are. That's where capital thinking begins. Not with a plan, but with identity. I know who I am, and anything that doesn't match that gets rejected. Not emotionally, but by principle. The principle. And here's the essence. Your future isn't decided in the office, or the street, or the market. It's decided in your head. Not when everything's easy, but when it's hard, when it breaks, when giving up feels like a relief. That's the moment. Either your principle holds, or the old program kicks in. If you want to live at the level of capital, don't just build a plan. Build a principle, and hold to it, without accept. At some point, you have to admit it. Everything you have was created by your thinking, and everything you don't have was created by it too. That's not fatalism, that's control. Because the moment you recognize thought as the source of your results, you stop playing the game of circumstances versus me, and you start a new game, me versus the old version of me. This is not a fight against an enemy, it's a battle with the version of you that still thinks small, with fear, with lack, with submission. True wealth doesn't start with money. It starts when you stop thinking like someone who needs and start thinking like someone who owns. First, ownership of yourself. Then your day. Then your direction. Only after that can you own anything else, because ownership is the result. The cause is a deep identity shaped by the thoughts you repeat daily. Most people live inside a mindset of enough is good. They don't even consider having more than enough. Not because they don't want it, but because they don't believe it. Deep down, there's still a voice saying, I don't deserve more. That voice doesn't shout, but it shapes every decision. And as long as it lives in your mind, capital won't arrive, because the subconscious will sabotage anything that challenges its beliefs. Abundance thinking isn't a feeling. It's a habit of seeing yourself as bigger than your circumstances, bigger than your background, bigger than other people's opinions. And you have to grow that habit through the words you use, through the people you talk to, through the questions you ask yourself. Slowly it replaces the old system, the one where you waited for permission and never got it. Here's the key. Allowing yourself to think big isn't arrogance. It's responsibility, because big resources only come to those with a mindset strong enough to handle them. So if you want more, don't start with action. Start with the thinking that can handle the weight. Capital thinking is systems thinking. And here's why. As long as you live in the logic of I do this, I get paid, you're stuck in transactions. And transactions are survival. They don't build the future. They only maintain the now. You work, they pay. Don't work, no pay. Simple. But that simplicity is the trap, because it never leads to growth. It locks you in a loop. Those who think big ask one thing: how do I turn this into a system? They don't chase quick money. They build structures that work without them. They don't cling to execution. They design mechanisms. They don't battle symptoms. They engineer causes. And that's why their income grows, and so does their control, over time, over choice, over their environment. That's the owner's mindset. It's not a job title. It's a position in the mind. And that position says, I'm not a slave to action. I'm a builder of systems. You can do the same task, but if you think transactionally, you'll always be tired, because every dollar depends on every move. But system thinking builds chains where your work keeps working, even when you're not. This isn't laziness. This is leverage, and leverage is the only real freedom. Only someone who thinks in systems can create it. And a system isn't just automation. It's discipline. It's consistency. It's standards. It's asking, can this scale? Can this repeat? Does this rely only on me? And here's the truth. If you only think in tasks, you'll always be the worker. But when you think in processes that run without you, you rise. You enter a new level, a level where capital thinking builds not a one-time win, but an ever-growing force. There's one word that exposes poverty thinking instantly, and that word is stability. It's loaded with fear. Fear of change, fear of loss, fear of stepping beyond what's familiar. That's why those who chase stability live in a loop, because stability is a pause, and pause is death to growth. Life doesn't stand still. It grows or it decays. Capital thinking embraces instability. It thinks big, fast, risky, not recklessly, but consciously. It knows growth is always uncomfortable, always uncertain, always outside the known. And that's where wealth is born, in the space of the unknown. Stability is a lie. It doesn't exist. You can have a secure job and lose it overnight. You can have steady income and be blindsided. And if your mind isn't trained for change, you won't survive it. That's why the most successful people always live ahead. They don't try to preserve. They keep creating. They keep climbing. They let go of the old and build better. Capital thinkers see the world as a shifting structure. They don't lean on what exists. They shape what's next. That ability to think beyond what is, that's true mental freedom. It gives you agility, speed, first mover advantage. And this isn't just business, it's life. Because those who think in motion never fall for long. You weren't born for stability. You were born to grow. And thinking that clings to stability doesn't protect you. It paralyzes you. But the thinking that pulls you forward, even when it's scary, that's your real strength. Because power doesn't live in control. It lives in the freedom of choosing to evolve. There's a moment that changes everything. It's the moment you stop thinking, how do I earn? And start thinking, how do I create impact? This isn't marketing. It's depth. Because money doesn't go where people sell. It goes where people build an atmosphere worth staying in. A vibe that transforms. A space that makes you think, act, rise. That's capital thinking. Not how do I take money, but how do I create value that sticks. Poor thinking is linear. I sell, you buy, you pay, I deliver. That's a short game. No relationship, no legacy. But impact thinking builds ecosystems. It thinks like a leader, a strategist, an architect. That's why people with capital thinking don't build just income. They build networks, brands, culture. And that's the highest level of wealth. You can do the simplest work, But if your mind is set on impact, that work becomes a platform. It attracts, it evolves. It's not just about product. It becomes an experience. Price stops being the issue because people aren't buying things. They're buying energy, yours. And when your energy is shaped by generosity, vision, strength, you're already playing in another league. To think in impact is to see farther. Ask yourself, what kind of imprint do I leave behind every action? If that imprint goes deeper than money, you're already building capital, because the strongest assets aren't in banks. They're in people's hearts and minds, the ones who received real value from you. That's why a creator's mindset always plays long, not in quantity, in quality, not in gain, in legacy. Don't start with action. Start with the thinking that asks, how do I make the world stronger? Because in that question lives the answer you've been looking for your whole life. The deepest capital isn't what you take, it's what you leave behind. There's one final arena where capital thinking shines brightest, and that's your relationship with yourself. You can't own money, people, or power until you own your own mind. The first sign of poor thinking is internal chaos, mental clutter, emotional noise, scattered focus. A person wants more, but can't sit in silence, can't put the phone down, can't plan a day, doesn't know what they really want. That's not stupidity. That's the cost of no structure. Wealthy minds don't just think in terms of business. They think in terms of order. Order in the morning, order in the mind, order in relationship. They lead themselves like they lead others, because they know if you don't control yourself, everything else will. And then deep thinking becomes impossible, because every move is just a reaction, and every reaction bleeds your power. Capital thinking is the thinking of a master, someone who understands. Their one asset is themselves, their body, their focus, their state. They don't live randomly. They don't float in chaos. They create rhythm, and that rhythm becomes the base of everything else. Your power isn't in your ideas. It's in your ability to focus. And focus doesn't show up on its own. It's a discipline. It's clearing space. It's sharpening action. It's asking, is what I'm doing right now moving me toward capital or just draining my energy? That's how higher level thinking is born. You can't live by default anymore, only by direction. When you become someone who thinks like capital, you'll never be able to think small again. Toxic conversations will repulse you. Chaotic habits will irritate you. Shallow choices will drain you, because you'll know every minute is an investment, and every thought is a decision. That kind of clarity is your greatest edge. Not flash, not status. Clarity, because clarity is always rich. Everything you have right now is the limit of your beliefs. If you're living on the edge, if money runs out faster than it comes in, if you're constantly in survival mode, it's not your situation, it's your thinking. A mindset that can't hold more, because the mind will never allow you to keep what you still haven't said, I deserve to. Wealth isn't a number, it's a container, a psychological capacity, the ability to hold certainty in the middle of chaos, the ability to receive big money without self-sabotage, the ability to think like someone who already has, not someone still earning the right to more. This is where the real break happens. You won't become wealthy while thinking like someone just trying to survive. If every decision comes from fear, from protection, from preservation, then all you build is scarcity. Scarcity of money, of courage, of action. Capital thinking does the opposite. It welcomes the challenge. It's not afraid to lose. It believes every loss is a new instruction. And that belief isn't naive. It's built through real-life hits that didn't destroy you. Because the strongest mindset isn't built in theory. It's built after the fall. You won't create more until you upgrade yourself. And it starts not with goals, not with plans, not with checklists, but with this: I think like the one who already has. I speak like the one who already owns. I act like the one who builds. And the world won't respond to your wishes. It'll respond to your signals. Because the world always mirrors not what you want, but who you've become. There's a mindset that attracts resources, and a mindset that repels them. The difference is clarity. Poor thinking constantly wavers. It doesn't know what it wants. Today, it's this goal. Tomorrow, another. Today, action. Tomorrow, doubt. And in that chaos, there's no room for growth. Because capital flows to focus, to clarity, to every action that says, I know where I'm going. The wealthiest people think straight. They lock in a vision and stick to it. They don't pause for emotions. They don't jump between options. They don't search for easier. They choose and they move. It's not always perfect, but it's consistent. And consistency builds force. That force becomes gravity. And that gravity attracts everything. Capital thinking doesn't live in what if it works. It lives in I work it until it does. That's not a slogan, that's a lifestyle. It's how you wake up, how you decide, not based on how you feel, but on where you're going. Lack of focus is the most expensive luxury there is. Multitasking, unfinished projects, chasing shiny things, all look like motion, but lead to nowhere. Only a mindset with a powerful no to distraction creates real progress. Because every no is a louder yes to your direction. And direction is what separates players from spectators. Until you define exactly who you are, where you're going, and what you no longer entertain, your mind won't build capital. It'll be too busy fighting the noise. And capital never lives in noise. It lives in clarity. There's a level of mindset where you no longer chase inspiration, because you're not driven by emotion, but by mission. It's the mindset that keeps moving, even when motivation runs dry. It doesn't ask, do I feel like it today? It knows results don't come from feelings. They come from ritual, from the structure you refuse to break, even when you're tired. Poor thinking only acts when it's hyped, when something clicks, when emotions are high, and that's why it breaks. Because life isn't a highlight reel, it's a marathon. And the winner isn't the one who starts fastest. It's the one who doesn't quit when it gets boring, painful, or unclear. Capital thinking is the mindset of a player who understands the cost of action. They don't chase drama, they chase progress. And they know the day you don't want to show up is the day that defines who you really are. Because that's when the line is drawn between who you hope to be and who you've chosen to become. That's the line between amateur and pro, between dreamer and builder. The builder sticks to rhythm. Not a flashy rhythm, a steady one, and from that rhythm, a different mindset is born. One that doesn't fold, doesn't flee, doesn't chase new ideas, but commits to the one already in hand. If you want to think like the wealthy, forget inspiration. Create a standard, and live it. Not because someone's watching, but because it's your choice. And then, even your hardest day becomes proof. You're already different. Not someday. Now. The biggest shift in poor thinking comes when you stop asking for permission. Permission to act, to grow, to speak, to be deep down. Most people still believe, I need approval. They live as if someone else has to let them rise. To say, now you can. That belief, that's the cage. Capital thinking doesn't wait for permission. It creates results. It doesn't ask, am I worthy? It says, I'm here, and moves. That's not arrogance. That's maturity. That's the understanding. No one's coming to save you. No one will validate you until you validate yourself. No one will invest in you if you're still investing in fear. The one who builds capital doesn't ask, they build. They don't need to prove. They don't defend. They don't explain. Their mind moves from within, not in response. That's why they don't waste energy doubting. They spend it building. And that movement, that's what breaks the old inertia, because when you're in motion, you're no longer a victim. You're the alternative. To think like the wealthy, you have to kill one thought. They need to see me. No, you need to show up, not as a performance, but as a presence, as power that doesn't need permission. And once that happens, everything changes, because you stop waiting and start shaping your space, your terms, your field. This isn't about defiance. It's about maturity. The moment you realize your thinking is no longer a child, it's not reactive. It's directional. And that direction begins with this. I don't wait for permission anymore. From that point, everything unfolds. Because that's where real freedom begins. And now we come to the final truth. Your mindset is not just a tool. It's your destiny. You will never break beyond what your mind allowed. You will never see beyond what your thoughts can imagine. You will never receive deeper than what your internal model believes is possible. As long as you live in what is, your life will stay as it is. But here's the power. You can change everything by changing the foundation. Not your situation, your thinking. not your environment, your awareness. And that change isn't a weekend workshop. It's a daily war against autopilot, against laziness, against the habit of thinking like everyone else. Only the one who wins that war inside wins outside. Because a mind that's learned to see more can never shrink back. The wealthiest think in consequences. They know today's thought is tomorrow's income. Today's focus, tomorrow's influence. Today's action, tomorrow's system. So they don't waste thoughts. They build an inner voice that lifts, not one that tears down. Because they know what you allow inside becomes your next chapter. Then here's the most important part. Mindset doesn't just take off. It doesn't transform magically. It shifts. When you ask yourself daily, does this thought take me toward capital or back into the old role? And if it's back, you don't wait. You break it. Replace it with a new thought, a new move, a new reflex. But step as real power, not power over markets, power over you, not over people, over your direction. And when you become someone who no longer settles for the old, mindset begins working for you. You don't think about capital. Capital starts growing.